If you think an enlarged prostate means an expensive road of prescriptions, procedures, and eventually surgery, in most cases that's simply not true. I believed it for years, and it cost me more peace of mind than it should have. I'm 83 now, I still get my exam every year without dread, and the thing that eased my discomfort the most cost me less than a single week of groceries. Here's a fact most men never hear. A large share of men past 50 carry some degree of an enlarged prostate. It's one of the most common conditions in aging men, not a rare diagnosis, and not automatically an expensive one to manage. What actually eased my pelvic discomfort was 5 cheap fruits, and today I'll walk you through every single one. For years, I assumed comfort had a price tag attached to it. A bigger prescription, a specialist visit, eventually maybe a procedure. That assumption cost me almost as much as the discomfort itself. Sitting at my own dinner table became something I quietly endured, a dull ache low in the pelvis that never fully let up, worse after a long day on my feet, worse in cold weather, worse for no reason at all some days. I stopped mentioning it to my wife because I didn't have new information to give her, just the same complaint on repeat. There's a particular kind of loneliness in carrying a discomfort you've stopped even describing out loud because you've said it so many times already. The doctor's visit that finally named it lasted under 10 minutes. He felt around, said, "It's your prostate, it's enlarged, very common," wrote a prescription and moved to the next room. I left more confused than when I'd walked in, and quietly assuming that from here on, managing this was simply going to be an expensive, ongoing project. Nobody had the time to tell me otherwise. That's not cruelty, that's just how a rushed system runs a patient through. Quick visit, quick script, next appointment booked a year out. An old friend of mine, a urologist who'd since retired, put it plainly over coffee one afternoon when I finally admitted how much this whole thing was weighing on me, financially and otherwise. He said most of what he saw men spend money on chasing this discomfort was reactive. One procedure or prescription stacked on the next, when a meaningful share of the underlying irritation responds to consistent, cheap, boring habits most men never try long enough to notice working. He wasn't dismissing real medical care. He was clear that exams and prescriptions still matter. He was just saying the expensive path isn't the only path, and often isn't even the first one worth trying. So I went looking on my own, and one of the first things I learned surprised me. The prostate sits wrapped around the urinary tube, pressed against a crowded bundle of nerves and tissue in the pelvis. When the gland swells, which is what enlarged simply means, it creates ongoing low-grade irritation in that whole crowded space, the way a stone in a shoe creates discomfort with every single step even though nothing is broken. Research has documented that this swelling is driven largely by inflammation and a hormonal shift that happens naturally with age. That reframe mattered enormously to me, because if the driver is inflammation, then a meaningful part of the answer was never going to be a specialist bill. It was going to be what I put on my own plate consistently most days. If you think the only path forward is expensive, in most cases, that's simply not the full picture. So then the real question becomes, what actually eases that discomfort cheaply and safely without pretending it's some overnight miracle? Before the 5 fruits, I want to be honest about the prescription, because nobody warns you ahead of time. Mine was meant to relax the muscle around the gland so the discomfort would ease. It helped some, but it wasn't free, and the side effects listed in fine print were exactly the things men my age worry about most: issues with blood pressure and, for some men, changes in intimacy. I'm not telling you to stop your prescription. That's a conversation for you and your doctor, not for me. I'm telling you why I went looking for something cheap to run alongside it, aimed at the inflammation driving the discomfort in the first place. Fruit number 1, and the cheapest real habit on this list, is the pumpkin seed, often sold in bulk bins for pocket change. In a study following men with an enlarged prostate, a concentrated pumpkin seed extract taken daily for 3 months produced a meaningful drop in symptom severity. A larger, year-long trial found mixed results on the main symptom score, but a real, measurable improvement in residual swelling in the pumpkin seed group. I'll say that honestly rather than oversell it. And in a more direct comparison, researchers pitted pumpkin seed oil against a standard prescription medication for easing prostate symptoms and found it performed comparably well, with far fewer of the side effects men dread at a fraction of the ongoing cost. Fruit number 2 is cranberry, sold dried in any grocery store for a few dollars a bag. A study following men specifically with lower urinary tract symptoms found that a daily cranberry supplement led to significantly fewer symptoms and better quality of life compared to placebo. The mechanism is about reducing irritation directly in that crowded, inflamed pelvic tissue. Fruit number 3 is pomegranate. I want to be upfront that this one is newer, early-stage evidence. A laboratory study using an animal model of prostate enlargement found that pomegranate's compounds measurably reduced markers of glandular swelling compared to untreated animals. Not proof in humans yet, but the mechanism lines up. Pomegranate carries a dense concentration of anti-inflammatory polyphenols, and a bag of pomegranate arils in the refrigerated produce section costs about the same as a coffee. Fruit number 4 is the blueberry, cheap in season and often available frozen year-round for even less. Blueberries are rich in anthocyanins, and researchers studying inflammation at the cellular level have documented that these compounds calm inflammatory signaling directly, quietly, in the background, exactly the kind of slow, cumulative support that adds up over weeks. And fruit number 5, I want to tell you honestly how I landed here, because the research I originally found for this 5th spot pointed toward a soy-derived compound, not a whole fruit, and I didn't want to hand you something that wasn't actually a fruit on a list I promised you was about fruit. So instead, fruit number 5 is the apple, and specifically the flavonoid inside it called quercetin, also found in onions and berries. In a study of men dealing with chronic pelvic discomfort, a flavonoid supplement built around quercetin produced a significant improvement in symptom scores over placebo in just 1 month. Men went from meaningfully uncomfortable to substantially better, while the placebo group barely moved. An apple a day won't match a concentrated supplement dose, but it's the cheapest, most accessible way to start putting that same compound to work, and it costs about 50 cents. Here's the honest picture, because I don't want you thinking 5 cheap fruits alone undoes years of discomfort. What worked for me was treating these 5 as a stacked, ordinary system, cheaper together than a single specialist copay. Pumpkin seeds most mornings, bought in bulk so a single bag lasted weeks. Cranberry, unsweetened, a few times a week, the dried kind from the baking aisle, not the sugared snack version. A small handful of pomegranate arils folded into breakfast, or a whole pomegranate split open on a Sunday and portioned out across the week. A palm of blueberries, plain, frozen in the off-season because frozen cost less than half of fresh and worked exactly the same. And an apple most afternoons, skin on, where a good share of the quercetin actually sits, which meant I wasn't even peeling anything, just rinsing it and eating it whole. Underneath all 5, I cut back hard on fried food and heavily processed meat. Both cost money and both, according to researchers tracking metabolic health, are connected to worse prostate inflammation and worse symptoms in this exact tissue, so cutting them saved money twice over, once at the register and once in fewer bad evenings. I also started walking most evenings instead of collapsing into the recliner, completely free. A large, long-running study of health professionals found that men who stayed physically active reported meaningfully fewer symptoms and slower progression of an enlarged prostate than men who stayed sedentary. Third, I started paying attention to how much I was drinking late in the evening, spacing fluids across the day instead of loading up after dinner, which cost nothing and eased the discomfort at night on top of everything else. None of it required a specialist. None of it was a pill. Just a small, cheap system, stacked and repeated week after week, quietly adding up. And through every bit of it, I kept my yearly exam on schedule without fail. That part is not negotiable, and I want to say it plainly. Nothing here replaces your doctor, your exam, or your screening schedule. This is support that lives alongside medical care, never instead of it, and it doesn't cost you either one. These days, the ache I used to quietly endure at my own dinner table is just gone most nights. I sit, I eat, I talk, and my body isn't part of the conversation anymore, and I haven't priced out a single procedure in years because I haven't needed to. I think about a man named Wallace, 74, drove a school bus for over 30 years outside Cedar Rapids, sitting for hours at a stretch every single day. He told me the discomfort had gotten bad enough that he'd looked into a procedure his doctor mentioned, and the cost alone made him put it off for 2 straight years, quietly suffering in the meantime rather than face the bill, telling himself he'd get to it eventually, once money loosened up. He talked it through with his doctor first, kept every appointment, and only then layered in the same 5 cheap fruits alongside cutting fried food and walking after his shift. About 2 months in, he told me the ache that used to define his last hour on the bus every day had faded to something he barely noticed, and he still hadn't spent a dime on the procedure he'd been dreading, and honestly wasn't sure anymore that he'd ever need it. He wasn't cured. He was comfortable, driving his route without wincing at every pothole, and his wallet was no worse for it. That's the actual goal, not a miracle. Comfort, cheaply, one ordinary grocery run at a time. What I want you to walk away with is this: easing this kind of discomfort doesn't have to be the expensive road you assumed it was. I think about the man I was, quietly assuming discomfort and expense were just the deal that came with getting older, doing math in his head about specialist bills he hadn't even scheduled yet. And I think about the man I am now, 83, comfortable at my own table, having spent almost nothing to get there beyond paying a little more attention to what was already sitting in the produce aisle the whole time. That's not youth. That's peace, bought cheap. It's the difference between believing you're stuck paying forever for a body that's failing you and realizing you were never actually out of affordable, ordinary options. So tell me in the comments, did you also assume this kind of discomfort meant an expensive road ahead? And has anyone in your life ever told you otherwise? I read every comment myself, and if this helped you see a cheaper, calmer path today, subscribe, because I've got more of what I've learned to share, and I'd like you to be here for it. Keep getting checked, keep talking to your doctor, and don't let the assumption of an expensive future keep you from trying something this ordinary and this cheap.